During the grimmest period of World War II, the small island of Malta in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea had become a beacon of hope for Allied forces. Hitler had to act. A massive strike plan, codenamed Operation Herkules, concocted by Mussolini and Hitler, intended to capture Malta. In anticipation, the Italians assembled an impressive array of troops, armament, ships, and aircraft. By storming the island fortress of Malta, the Axis powers would deal a massive blow to Allied forces while also showing their collective military might. It could invariably shore up a German and Italian victory. The Axis powers devised waves of extensive air and sea landings. Their aim was not only to eliminate their enemies, but to secure a solid supply line and transport between Europe and the Middle East. Still, the operation, along with its potential horrors, would fade into historical archives. Until now. Due to its relatively small size and insignificant military presence, Malta's strategic significance wasn't clear. Still, by 1941, it was regarded as an island fortress. As Hurricanes and Spitfires were sent in by the British, the rest of the Allies started investing in defending the outpost island. The following year, Axis powers tasked Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, stationed in Sicily, with commanding the attacks on the island. Malta and its civilian population grew increasingly accustomed to constant, relentless bombing campaigns. They seemed hell-bent on totally obliterating the island. British historian Alan Moorhead said of the attacks, quote, "One after another, all the great sieges were eclipsed. England and Odessa, Sevastopol and Tobruk. Malta became the most bombed place on Earth." By then, the majority of European nations were under German control or fighting to repel the German army. The Allies were failing to secure any significant victories. Alexandria seemed ready to fall to the Germans, which cut Allied supply lines from the Middle East. Yet even under these grim circumstances, Malta resisted. The small island quickly became a symbol of hope and resilience. The Allies continued its reinforcement efforts. Suddenly, the Axis forces fixated on squashing any form of resistance that popped up on the island. They soon drew up plans to invade. By 1942, Malta was considered a fortress. Its defenses included 15 infantry battalions, 11 of which came from the Commonwealth. Starting in November 1940, forces totaled 26,000 men supported by tanks from the 1st Independent Troop of the Royal Tank Regiment. This regiment counted with 4 Matilda IIs, 2 Vickers Mark VI Cs. By January of 1942, an additional 4 Cruiser Mark Is, 3 Cruiser Mark IVs, and another Vickers Mark VI C arrived. As for artillery, Malta's forces received the 12th Field Regiment from the British Army, which provided 24 88mm cannons with a range of 6.8 miles. This regiment set to cover all of the islands while also being protected in rigid positions. Malta's armory included 130 coastal guns, 112 of which were considered heavy, and 144 light anti-aircraft weapons. When World War II hit Malta, the country first reacted by cutting the number of crossings made by the Marfa to Gozo ferries in 1940. By 1942, the boats ventured only 2 trips per week, since the Royal Lady ferry was split in half by a bomb while moored at Imjar Harbor. That same year, the British sent 67 more Spitfires to Malta, transported to the island aboard the USS Wasp and HMS Eagle. Unfortunately, 5 planes were lost on the voyage. Once the HMS Welshman arrived from Gibraltar, the Spitfires flew support for Operation Bowery. The mine layer was disguised as a French cruiser to gain access to Grand Harbor, delivering fuel, ammo, engines, and even food to Malta. More importantly, it brought 100 Royal Air Force technicians to assist with the Spitfires. By May 10th, both vessels and aircraft made it onto the island. On that day, the Luftwaffe began a series of bombing raids to sink the HMS Welshman, as well as other ships. The German planes were invariably driven off or shot down by the concentrated anti-aircraft weaponry and Spitfires. Furthermore, a smokescreen that covered Grand Harbor derailed the offensive. It's estimated that Malta's strong defenses damaged or destroyed at least 63 German aircraft. This series of momentous events was eventually named the Glorious 10th of May. Churchill recalled in his memoirs, quote, "The bombing attacks on Malta, which had reached their peak in April, now began to slacken, largely as a result of great air battles on May 9th and 10th, when 60 Spitfires, which had just arrived, went into action with destructive effect. Daylight raiding was brought to an end." There were 246 air raid alerts throughout May, another 169 in June, and 184 more in July. Allied estimates totaled 620 tons of bombs falling on Malta during May alone. On May 18th, the Allies arrested Carmelo Borg Pisani, a Maltese spy working for Benito Mussolini long before Italy entered the war. Pisani intended to assist Il Duce in eventually annexing the island. Thankfully, the Allied intelligence community learned of many Axis plans involving Malta through his arrest and subsequent questioning. During the last few days of April, Hitler and Mussolini met in Salzburg, Austria, to discuss their strategy in the Mediterranean. They discussed the invasion of Malta, deciding to begin as soon as the Axis powers had secured the British vanquished North Africa and Libya. The codename, Operation Herkules. The Italian Comando Supremo, or Army General Staff, studied the amount of sea transport that would suffice in conquering North Africa in the late 1930s. He concluded it best first to overtake Malta. The outline of the assault, periodically looked over and revised, ultimately went neglected. Nevertheless, Hitler and Mussolini formally approved the plan in a meeting on the 29th and 30th of April 1942. The airborne portion went to General Major Kurt Student and the Fliegerkorps 9. Later, Student discussed the high degree of intelligence available at the time. Quote, "We even knew the caliber of the coastal guns and how many degrees they could be turned inland." Assigned to the task were several aircraft. 500 Junkers Ju-52 transport aircraft would conduct airborne landings, in addition to the 300 DFS-300 gliders and 200 GO-242 gliders providing support. General Student commanded 24 Messerschmitt Me-321s, gigantic gliders carrying 200 paratroopers each. These planes towed the frightfully new HE-111Z medium bombers, as the Italian Royal Air Force provided approximately 200 transport planes. Since the Axis airfields in Sicily stood 90 miles away from their intended drop zones, some aircraft took 4 round trips on any given day. A German and Italian airborne division would descend on the southern tip of the island to overtake the high ground to the back of the invasive breaches. Furthermore, they planned to secure an airfield for more supplies and troops to arrive. Approximately 29,000 troops would arrive by air. The other side of Operation Hercules was seaborne. 70,000 Italian troops waited for their amphibious landings on the southeast of Malta, at Famagosta Beach, Marsashlock Bay. Their aim, capturing the smaller islands of Gozo and Camino. False amphibious landings would occur at St. Paul's and Melieha Bays and near the Victoria Lines or the Great Wall of Malta. These would distract the British and facilitate both the amphibious and airborne landings. Supporting these landings were 19 self-propelled Semovente 4732 guns and 8 Semovente 7518 and 30 L3 tankettes. A German unit almost exclusively equipped with captured Russian tanks, including 10 KV-1 and KV-2 tanks, would participate in the country's taking. Modified Italian motos a terre, or naval ferry barges, set to transport the tanks. The amphibious landings would take place over 2 days, which the Axis powers believed fast enough to secure Marseilles Bay and set them on the path to victory. Preparations for the airborne component of Operation Herkules saw the construction of 3 airstrips for gliders on the southern side of Mount Etna. The Regia Marina did not have enough landing craft for the amphibious attack, so they got the Kriegsmarine to build German Type A Marine Fairpram copies at Italian shipyards. These ferries were 220 long tons, able to transport 200 equipped soldiers as well as 2 or 3 medium tanks. 65 vessels were built by July of 1942. 20 of the German ships completed the required fleet after sailing up the River Rhone. Seabull ferries and other landing craft were sent by rail to Italy from Germany. These included powered and rowing vessels. The Italians assembled other ships, including 2 railway ferries previously used at the Strait of Messina that could carry 4 to 8 tanks. They even prepared converted passenger ferries and ships, ex-trawlers, converted mine layers, and a whopping 74 motorboats. The Italians requested 200 German Sturmboote to aid in mobilizing troops from ship to shore. All arranged vessels would fall under the Forza Navale Speciale at the command of Admiral Vittorio Tur. The Italians acquired special landing equipment such as the Seeschlager, or Sea Snake, a floating bridge initially created for Operation Sea Lion. To protect its troop convoys, the Italians assembled a mighty force of warships, including 4 battleships, 4 heavy cruisers, 8 light cruisers, and 21 destroyers. The defense ships would sprout from the Messina, Reggio Calabria, Augusta, and Cagliari ports. As if the invasion plan weren't intensive enough, the Axis powers would send in submarines to intercept any British vessels aiming to stop the landings. 1 German submarine would be placed between Sicily and Malta to provide signaling for Axis aircraft. The Italians were confident that their collective strength would lead to absolute superiority and that they could fend off any daylight attacks. Their main worry was nighttime attacks by the British, because they lacked shipborne radar and had little or no training or equipment for night flights. The Italians feared that the situation could devolve into a defeat, similar to the Battle of Cape Marapan, where they lost 5 vessels and left with 2 heavily damaged ones. Such a situation would have placed huge targets on the slow convoys and all but ensured an aerial confrontation wherein the British would have the upper hand. To prevent such a situation, the Regia Marina gave the Littorio battleship an experimental yet unreliable radar device in August of 1941. Early in the following year, they refitted the radar, a better one, albeit still deficient. It wasn't until March of 1942 that the Italians obtained German Day 2 radar devices that could find surface ships up to 14 nautical miles away. With extensive preparations underway by the Italians, the Axis powers settled on invading in July. Still, Luftwaffe leader Hermann Göring was against the invasion because he believed it would turn out just as severely as Kreutz invasion. Hitler heard his concerns and heard supportive arguments from Field Marshal Erwin Rommel and Field Marshal Albert Kesselring. At the start of 1942, the German Fliegerkorps II heavily bombed Malta, taking down its defenses and affecting its population's morale. By May 10th, German commander Albert Kesselring felt he had done enough and moved his troops to North Africa. Although promoted to Unternehmen Herkules, or commander of the operation, Kesselring increasingly worried too many planes had to be diverted into Egypt, making the invasion of Malta unfeasible. Over a month later, Erwin Rommel took Tobruk in Libya. Although he believed he needed to cease involvement in North Africa in favor of Malta, Hitler focused instead on attacking the Suez Canal. Historians agree that this choice marked the death of Operation Herkules.